Okay, hi guys. In today's lesson, we're going to see verbs in the indefinite past part 2. If you want to check verbs in the indefinite past in Spanish part 1, then you can check the previous video so you can have an idea of what I will talk about in this lesson, okay? So, let's start with regular verbs ending with ar in Spanish, okay? Remember, first we have our personal pronouns, okay? Then next, we're going to have the root of our verb, okay? And then we're going to have the ending, okay, of the verb, okay? So, for example, if we have the personal pronoun I, which means yo, in Spanish, then we're going to have the root, like the base word, and then the ending of that word, okay, in the past tense, indefinite past, will be letter E with an accent, okay? If we're talking about the personal pronoun yo, I, okay? Take that into account, remember that, and then we're going to see some verbs so you will know what I'm talking about, okay? Then the next personal pronoun we have is you, which means in Spanish tú, okay? So with the personal pronoun tú, okay, the ending of our verb will be ending in aste. A-S-T-E in Spanish is pronounced aste. Aste, okay? Okay, personal pronoun you, tú, our verb will end with aste, okay? Now, third persons, with third persons I mean she, which means él, she, which means ella, it, which means eso or esa, okay, when we're talking about things. Then if we have these third persons, the ending of our verb would be ending with letter O with an accent, okay? So, third person pronouns ending with letter O with an accent, okay? Now, if we have the personal pronoun we, which means nosotros in Spanish, then the ending of our verb will be amos, okay? Amos, if we're talking about the personal pronoun we, nosotros in Spanish, okay? Now we're talking about the personal pronouns you in the plural form, which means in Spanish ustedes, or they, which means in Spanish ellos if we're talking about a group of boys, or ellas if we're talking about a group of girls, okay? Then our verb has to end with aron, okay? So now let's see some verbs so you will understand these rules, okay? Here we have this verb to order, okay? Order means ordenar, okay? In Spanish. So now let's see how we're going to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past in Spanish, okay? So we have the personal pronoun I, which means yo, okay? Yo, I, ordered, okay, it's in past tense, indefinite past, ordené, okay, ordené. Now, as you can see, orden, the word in white letters, orden, okay? Yo, it's the personal pronoun I, and then we have the root word, which is orden, okay? As you can see in all the personal pronouns we have below, we have the same root, okay? It doesn't change, okay? So if it stays the same, it's because it's a regular verb, okay? And now see the ending of the verb, it's ending with letter E with an accent, okay? So, to say you ordered, you have to say yo ordené, okay? Past tense, indefinite past in Spanish, okay? Now, if you want to say you ordered, then you have to say tú ordenaste in Spanish, okay? Tú ordenaste means you ordered, okay? And see, you have personal pronoun you, which means tú, and then the root word, which is orden, okay? And then the ending, aste, because you have the personal pronoun tú, okay? In Spanish. Tú ordenaste, okay? Now, if you have the personal pronoun he, él, then the way you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past is él ordenó, okay? Which means he ordered. Él ordenó. Él ordenó, okay? And see, the ending is letter O with an accent. Third person, él, he, she, ella, below, and then it, eso, okay, or esa, if you're talking about like female stuff, okay, thing or animal. Now, if you are saying she ordered, then you have to say ella ordenó. Ella ordenó. Okay, she ordered. And see, the ending is exactly the same because we're talking about third person, okay, personal pronoun. Now, if you're talking about it, then you have to say eso or esa. Okay, I forgot to put letter A also. Eso ordenó. It ordered. Okay, and look, the ending is exactly the same. Él ordenó, ella ordenó, eso ordenó, because those are third personal pronouns, third person, okay? Now, if you're talking about the personal pronoun we, nosotros, if you want to say we ordered, using the indefinite past, then you have to say in Spanish, nosotros ordenamos. Nosotros ordenamos. We ordered. Okay? Now, if you want to say you ordered in the plural form, okay, then you have to say ustedes ordenaron. Ustedes ordenaron. Okay? So, with the personal pronoun ustedes, then your verb, regular verb ending with ar, then you have to put aron, okay? Aron. It's ending with aron. And now, finally, with the personal pronoun they, which means in Spanish, ellos, if you're talking about a group of boys, or ellas, if you're talking about a group of girls. If you want to say they ordered, you have to say ellos ordenaron. Ellos ordenaron, if you're talking about a group of boys, or ellas ordenaron. Ellas ordenaron, if you're talking about a group of girls, okay? And now we have this verb to feed, okay? To feed means alimentar. Alimentar. Alimentar in Spanish, okay? So now let's see how we're going to conjugate this regular verb in Spanish according to the indefinite past, okay? Here we have I fed, which means yo alimenté. Yo alimenté. Okay? Now, if you want to say you fed, then you have to say tú alimentaste. Tú alimentaste. Okay, so if your personal pronoun is I, yo, then you have to end this regular verb with letter E with an accent, okay? If you have the personal pronoun you, tú, in Spanish, you have to end your verb with aste, okay? And the root word, the word that is not changing because it's regular verb, will be aliment, aliment. Okay, as you can see, white part is not changing, okay? And then the yellow part is changing according to the personal pronoun you have, okay? Now, if you want to say he fed, then you have to say él alimentó, él alimentó, él alimentó. Now, according to the personal pronoun she fed. In Spanish, you have to say ella alimentó, ella alimentó. Now, to say it fed, in Spanish, you have to say eso alimentó, eso alimentó. Now, according to the personal pronoun we, if you want to say we fed, then in Spanish, you have to say nosotros alimentamos, nosotros alimentamos. And if you want to say you in the plural form, you fed, in Spanish you have to say ustedes alimentaron, ustedes alimentaron. Now, according to the personal pronoun they, if you're talking about a group of boys, you have to say ellos alimentaron, ellos alimentaron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas alimentaron, ellas alimentaron. And now let's see another verb. We have the verb to observe, okay? To observe in Spanish means observar, 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 okay? Now let's see how we're going to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past in Spanish, okay? In English, we say I observed, I observed. In Spanish, you're going to say yo observé, yo observé. Okay, see the root word in this case will be observe, observe. Okay, and then the ending according to the personal pronoun you have, okay? Now, if you want to say you observed, then you have to say tú observaste, tú observaste. Now with the personal pronoun he observed, él observó, él observó. To say she observed, you have to say ella observó, ella observó. Now with the personal pronoun it, eso or esa, then you have to say eso observó, it observed, eso observó, okay? If you want to say we observed, you have to say nosotros observamos, nosotros observamos. Now to say you observed in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes observaron, ustedes observaron. And finally, with the personal pronoun they, if you want to say ellos observaron, they observed. If you're talking about a group of boys, ellos, then in Spanish you have to say ellos observaron, okay? And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas observaron, ellas observaron, okay? Now we have this verb to cool or to chill, which means in Spanish enfriar, 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 okay? Let's see how we have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past, okay? Here we have I cooled, which means yo enfrié, yo enfrié. Now, if you want to say you cooled, then you have to say tú enfriaste, tú enfriaste. Okay, see the root word in this case, it's enfrí, enfrí. Okay, this is a part without changing, okay? Now, according to the personal pronoun he, we have he cooled, which means él enfrió, él enfrió. She cooled, ella enfrió, Ella enfrió. Okay, now if you want to say it cooled, then you have to say eso enfrió. Eso enfrió. Now if you want to say we cooled, you have to say nosotros enfriamos. Nosotros enfriamos. If you want to say you cooled in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes enfriaron. Ustedes enfriaron. And then with the personal pronoun they, if you're talking about a group of boys, then you have to say ellos enfriaron, okay, which means they cooled. Ellos enfriaron. And then if you're talking about a group of girls, you have to say ellas enfriaron, okay, which is in English, they cooled, exactly the same. Ellas enfriaron, okay? Now we have this verb to freeze, okay, to freeze. Congelar, congelar, okay, in Spanish. And the way you have to conjugate this, it's yo congelé, okay, which means I froze. Yo congelé. Yo congelé. Okay? Now, if you want to say you froze, you have to say tú congelaste. Tú congelaste. If you want to say he froze, you have to say él congeló. Él congeló. Now, if you want to say she froze, you have to say ella congeló. Ella congeló. If you want to say it froze, you have to say eso congeló. Eso congeló. Now, if you want to say we froze, you have to say in Spanish, nosotros congelamos. Nosotros congelamos. If you want to say you froze in the plural form, in Spanish, in the indefinite past, you have to say ustedes congelaron. Ustedes congelaron. And then with the personal pronoun they, if you want to talk about a group of boys, in Spanish, in the indefinite past, you have to say ellos congelaron, okay? They froze. Ellos congelaron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas congelaron. Ellas congelaron. And now we have this verb to shout or to scream. In Spanish means gritar. Gritar. Okay, gritar. And this is the way we're going to conjugate this verb. If you want to say I shouted or I screamed, then you have to say in Spanish, yo grité. Yo grité. Okay? Now, if you want to say you shouted, you have to say tú gritaste. Tú gritaste. Tú gritaste. Okay? See, the root word is grit. And then the word in yellow, it's the word you have to use according to the personal pronoun. Okay? Now we have he screamed or he shouted. In Spanish would be él gritó. Él gritó. Now to say she shouted, you have to say ella gritó. Ella gritó. If you want to say it shouted, you have to say eso gritó. Eso gritó. Now if you want to say we screamed, we shouted, you have to say nosotros gritamos. Nosotros gritamos. And then if you want to say you shouted or you screamed in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes gritaron. Ustedes gritaron. And then if you want to say they shouted or they screamed, in Spanish you have to say, if you're talking about a group of men, then you have to say ellos gritaron. Ellos gritaron. And if you want to talk about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas gritaron. Ellas gritaron, okay? They shouted, they screamed. Now we have the next verb, to suck. Okay, suck in Spanish means chupar. Chupar. Okay, chupar. And let's see how we have to conjugate this in the indefinite past in Spanish, okay? If you want to say I sucked in Spanish, you have to say yo chupé. Yo chupé. If you want to say you sucked, you have to say tú chupaste. Tú chupaste. If you want to say he sucked, you have to say él chupó. Él chupó. If you want to say she sucked, you have to say ella chupó. Ella chupó. If you want to say it sucked, then you have to say eso chupó. Eso chupó. To say we sucked, you have to say nosotros chupamos. Nosotros chupamos. Now to say you sucked in the plural form, in Spanish you have to say ustedes chuparon. Ustedes chuparon. And then if you want to say they sucked, if you're talking about a group of boys, in Spanish you have to say ellos chuparon. Ellos chuparon. And if you're talking about a group of girls, you have to say ellas chuparon. Ellas chuparon. All right, now we have this verb to scold, okay? To scold, which means in Spanish, regañar. 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 So let's see how we're going to conjugate this in the indefinite past in Spanish, okay? If you want to say I scolded, you have to say yo regañé. Yo regañé. Okay, see the root word is regañ. Okay, this is not changing. See? That's why it's regular. Now, if you want to say you scolded, then you have to say in Spanish, tú regañaste. Tú regañaste. Now, if you want to say he scolded, past tense, indefinite past in Spanish, you have to say él regañó. Él regañó. If you want to say she scolded, you have to say ella regañó. Ella regañó. Now, if you want to say it scolded, you have to say eso regañó. Eso regañó. If you want to say we scolded, you have to say nosotros regañamos. Nosotros regañamos. If you want to say you scolded in the plural form, you have to say ustedes regañaron. Ustedes regañaron. And if you want to say they scolded, you have to say ellos regañaron. If you're talking about a group of men, ellos regañaron. Ellos regañaron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas regañaron. Ellas regañaron. All right, now we have this verb to count, okay? We have two meanings of this word in Spanish, okay? The first meaning is to count, okay, like 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? And the other meaning is to tell a story to someone, okay? So let's see how we're going to conjugate this in Spanish, okay? So if you want to say I counted or I told, then you have to say in Spanish yo conté, okay? This is an indefinite past. Yo conté, okay? The root word is cont, okay? See, it's not changing. Regular verb, okay? Yo conté, okay? I counted, I told. Now, according to the personal pronoun you, then you have to say you counted or you told. In Spanish means or is tú contaste. Tú contaste. Okay? Now, if you want to say he counted or he told, then you have to say él contó. Él contó. Okay? Now, according to the personal pronoun she, then you have to say she counted or she told. In Spanish, ella contó. Ella contó. Now, if you want to say it counted, it told, then you have to say eso contó. Eso contó. Now, according to the personal pronoun we, nosotros, if you want to say we counted or we told, then you have to say nosotros contamos. Nosotros contamos. Now, according to the personal pronoun you in the plural form, you have to say you counted or you told. In Spanish, you have to say ustedes contaron. Ustedes contaron. And then we have the personal pronoun they. If you're talking about a group of boys, then you have to say ellos contaron. Ellos contaron, which means they counted, they told, or ellas contaron. Ellas contaron if you're talking about a group of girls, okay? So now we have this verb to need, okay? Need in Spanish means necesitar. Necesitar, okay? And this is the way we're going to conjugate this in the indefinite past, okay? If you want to say I needed, then you have to say in Spanish, yo necesité. Yo necesité. If you want to say you needed, you have to say tú necesitaste. Tú necesitaste. Okay, the root word necesit. Okay, in every personal pronoun. Now, if you want to say he needed, you have to say él necesitó. Él necesitó. If you want to say she needed, you have to say ella necesitó. Ella necesitó. If you want to say it needed, you have to say eso necesitó. Eso necesitó. Now, if you want to say we needed, you have to say in Spanish, nosotros necesitamos. Nosotros necesitamos. Now, if you have the personal pronoun you in the plural form, in Spanish you have to say ustedes necesitaron. Okay? Which means you needed in the plural form. Ustedes necesitaron. Ustedes necesitaron. Now, if you want to say they needed, if you want to talk about a group of boys, then in Spanish you have to say ellos necesitaron. Ellos necesitaron. Okay, now if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas necesitaron. Ellas necesitaron. Now I have this verb to walk. Okay, to walk in Spanish means caminar. 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 And let's see how we have to conjugate this in the indefinite past. Okay, we have I walked, which means yo caminé. Yo caminé. Now, if you want to say you walked, you have to say tú caminaste. Tú caminaste. Okay, see the root word, the part that is not changing, it's the word camin. Camin, it's the same. Okay, tú caminaste. Now, if you want to say he walked, then you have to say él caminó. She walked. Ella caminó. It walked. You have to say eso caminó. Now, if you want to say we walked, in Spanish you have to say nosotros caminamos. We walked. Nosotros caminamos. Now, if you want to say you walked in the plural form, then in Spanish you have to say ustedes caminaron. Ustedes caminaron. And finally, we're talking about the personal pronoun they. If you're talking about a group of men, then you have to say ellos caminaron. Okay, they walked. Ellos caminaron. And if you're talking about a group of women, then you have to say ellas caminaron. Ellas caminaron. And now we have this verb to sing, which means in Spanish, cantar. 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 Okay, and let's see how we're going to conjugate this in the indefinite past. Okay, if you want to say I sang, then you have to say yo canté. Yo canté. The root word would be cant. Okay, and then you have to end it with letter E accent because you're talking about a personal pronoun. The personal pronoun I, yo. Okay, now if you want to say you sang, then you have to say tú cantaste. Tú cantaste. Okay, now with the personal pronoun he sang, then you have to say in Spanish él cantó. Él cantó. Now with the personal pronoun she, if you want to say she sang, then you have to say ella cantó. Ella cantó. With the personal pronoun it, if you want to say it sang, then you have to say eso cantó. Eso cantó. And now if you want to say we sang, then you have to say nosotros cantamos. Nosotros cantamos. Now if you want to say you sang in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes cantaron. Ustedes cantaron. And then if you want to say they sang, you have to say ellos cantaron. Ellos cantaron if you are referring to a group of guys, or ellas cantaron. Ellas cantaron if you are referring to a group of boys, okay? Now we have this verb to brush, okay? Brush in Spanish means cepillar. 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 Okay, let's see how you have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past. Okay, if you want to say I brushed, in Spanish you have to say yo cepillé. This is an indefinite past, okay? Yo cepillé. Yo cepillé. Now, if you want to say you brushed, then you have to say tú cepillaste. Tú cepillaste. Okay, as you can see, the root word that is not changing, it's cepish. Okay, and then aste, because you have the personal pronoun you, which means tú in Spanish. Okay, now if you want to say he brushed, in Spanish you have to say él cepilló. To say she brushed, you have to say ella cepilló. Ella cepilló. Now if you want to say it brushed, in Spanish you have to say eso cepilló. Eso cepilló. If you want to say we brushed, you have to say nosotros cepillamos. Nosotros cepillamos. Now in the plural form, if you want to say you brushed, in Spanish you have to say ustedes cepillaron. Ustedes cepillaron. And then if you want to say they brushed, in Spanish you have to say, if you're talking about a group of guys, ellos cepillaron. Ellos cepillaron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas cepillaron. Ellas cepillaron. Now we have this verb to comb. Okay, to comb in Spanish means peinar. peinar, peinar. And let's see how you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past. If you want to say I combed, then you have to say yo peiné, yo peiné. Okay, the root word in this case, pein. Okay, and then the ending according to the personal pronoun. Okay, it's ending with E with an accent because you have personal pronoun yo, I. Okay, now if you want to say you combed, then you have to say tú peinaste, tú peinaste. If you want to say he combed, then you have to say él peinó, él peinó. Okay, indefinite past. Now if you want to say she combed, then you have to say ella peinó, ella peinó. Now if you want to say it combed, then you have to say eso peinó, eso peinó. If you want to say we combed, then we have to say nosotros peinamos, nosotros peinamos. If you want to say you combed in the plural form, in Spanish you have to say ustedes peinaron, ustedes peinaron. And now you have to say they combed. If you want to talk about a group of boys, you have to say ellos peinaron, ellos peinaron. And then if you want to talk about a group of girls, you have to say ellas peinaron, ellas peinaron. And now we have this verb to breathe. Okay, to breathe in Spanish means respirar, respirar, respirar. So let's see how we're going to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past. Okay, if you want to say I breathed, then you have to say in Spanish, yo respiré, yo respiré. The root word will be respir. Okay, this is the part not changing. Okay, that's why it's regular. Now if you want to say you breathed, then you have to say tú respiraste, tú respiraste. Okay? He breathed means él respiró, él respiró. Now if you want to say she breathed, then you have to say ella respiró, ella respiró. If you want to say it breathed, then you have to say eso respiró, eso respiró. Now, if we're talking about the personal pronoun we breathed, then in Spanish we have to say nosotros respiramos, nosotros respiramos. Now, if you want to say you breathed in the plural form in Spanish, you have to say ustedes respiraron, ustedes respiraron. Now, if you want to say they breathed, if you're talking about a group of guys, you have to say ellos respiraron, ellos respiraron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas respiraron, ellas respiraron. And now we have this verb to inhale. Okay, if you want to say this in Spanish, you have to say inhalar, inhalar, inhalar. And this is the way we're going to conjugate this verb, okay? If you want to say I inhale, you have to say yo inhalé, yo inhalé. Okay, the root word that is not going to change is inhal, inhal. Okay? And now, if you want to say you inhale, you have to say tú inhalaste, tú inhalaste. Now, if you want to say he inhaled, you have to say él inhaló, él inhaló. Now, if you want to say she inhaled, you have to say ella inhaló, ella inhaló. If you want to say it inhaled, you have to say eso inhaló. Eso inhaló. If you want to say we inhaled, you have to say nosotros inhalamos. Nosotros inhalamos. If you want to say you in the plural form, you inhaled, you have to say ustedes inhalaron. Ustedes inhalaron. If you want to say they inhaled, you have to say, if you're talking about a group of boys, ellos inhalaron. Ellos inhalaron. They inhaled. And if you want to talk about a group of girls, then you have to say, ellas inhalaron. Ellas inhalaron. And now we have the opposite, okay? The verb exhale. So if you want to say this in Spanish, you have to say exhalar. Exhalar. Exhalar, okay? So let's see how you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past. If you want to say I exhaled, then you have to say in Spanish, yo exhalé. Yo exhalé. Now, if you want to say you exhaled, you have to say tú exhalaste. Tú exhalaste. He exhaled would be él exhaló. Él exhaló. Now, if you want to say she exhaled, you have to say ella exhaló. Ella exhaló. If you want to say it exhaled, you have to say eso exhaló. Eso exhaló. If you want to say we exhaled, you have to say nosotros exhalamos. Nosotros exhalamos. If you want to say you in the plural form, exhaled, you have to say in Spanish, ustedes exhalaron. Ustedes exhalaron. And you have to say they exhaled. Ellos exhalaron. If you're talking about a group of boys, ellos exhalaron. And ellas exhalaron. If you're talking about a group of girls, okay? Ellas exhalaron. Now we have this verb to hate, okay? Hate in Spanish means odiar. 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 Now let's see how we're going to conjugate this verb. If you want to say, I hated, indefinite past in Spanish, you have to say, yo odié. Yo odié. Okay, here, the root word, the word that is not changing, it's odi. Odi. Okay, yo odié. Okay, it's ending with letter E with an accent because it's personal pronoun. I, yo. Now, if you want to say you hated, you have to say tú odiaste. Tú odiaste. If you want to say he hated, you have to say él odió. Él odió. To say she hated, you have to say ella odió. Ella odió. To say it hated, you have to say eso odió. Eso odió. To say we hated, you have to say nosotros odiamos. Nosotros odiamos. To say you hated in the plural form, you have to say in Spanish, ustedes odiaron. Ustedes odiaron. And you have to say they hated if you want to say ellos odiaron. Ellos odiaron if you're talking about a group of boys, and ellas odiaron. Ellas odiaron if you're talking about a group of girls, okay? And now we have this verb to mop. Okay, to mop means in Spanish trapear. 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 Now let's see how we have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past. Okay, if you want to say I mopped, you have to say in Spanish yo trapé. Yo trapé. Okay, see the root word is trape. Trape. Yo trapé. Okay, with an accent, letter E at the end. Now, if you want to say you mopped, you have to say tú trapeaste. Tú trapeaste. Now, to say he mopped, you have to say él trapeó. Él trapeó. To say she mopped, you have to say ella trapeó. Ella trapeó. To say it mopped, you have to say eso trapeó. Eso trapeó. To say we mopped, you have to say nosotros trapeamos. Nosotros trapeamos. And now to say you mopped in the plural form, you have to say ustedes trapearon. Ustedes trapearon. And then if you want to say they mopped, you have to say, if you're talking about a group of boys, ellos trapearon. Ellos trapearon. And if you want to talk about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas trapearon. Ellas trapearon. And now we have this verb to clean, okay? To clean means in Spanish, limpiar. 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 And this is the way we have to conjugate the indefinite past, okay? If you want to say I cleaned, then you have to say yo limpié. Yo limpié. Okay, see the root word in this case, it's limpi. Limpi. Ending with letter E accent because it's personal pronoun I, yo. Okay? If you want to say you cleaned, then you have to say tú limpiaste. Tú limpiaste. Okay, indefinite past. Now, if you want to say he cleaned, then you have to say él limpió. Él limpió. If you want to say she cleaned, you have to say ella limpió. Ella limpió. If you want to say it cleaned, then you have to say eso limpió. Eso limpió. If you want to say we cleaned, you have to say nosotros limpiamos. Nosotros limpiamos. If you want to say you cleaned in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes limpiaron. Ustedes limpiaron. And now if you want to say they cleaned, in Spanish you have to say, if you're talking about a group of boys, ellos limpiaron. Ellos limpiaron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas limpiaron. Ellas limpiaron. And now we have this verb to rise or to pick up, okay, which means in Spanish, levantar. 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 Now let's see how we have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past. Okay, if you want to say, I picked up, past tense, indefinite past in Spanish, I picked up or I raised, then you have to say in Spanish, yo levanté. Yo levanté. Now if you want to say you picked up, you raised, then you have to say in Spanish, tú levantaste. Tú levantaste. Okay, aste, it's because you have the personal pronoun you, tú. Okay? If you want to say he raised or he picked up, then you have to say in Spanish, él levantó. Él levantó. Now, if you want to say she picked up or she raised, then you have to say ella levantó. Ella levantó. Now, if you want to say it picked up or it raised, then you have to say eso levantó. Eso levantó. If you want to say we raised or we picked up, then you have to say nosotros levantamos. Nosotros levantamos. If you want to say you picked up or you raised, then you have to say in the plural form in Spanish, ustedes levantaron. Ustedes levantaron. And now if you want to say they raised or they picked up, then in Spanish you have to say, if you are referring to a group of boys, ellos levantaron. Ellos levantaron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say, ellas levantaron. Ellas levantaron. And now we have this verb to remove or to delete, which means in Spanish, eliminar. Eliminar. Eliminar, okay? So let's see how we're going to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past. If you want to say, I removed or I deleted, then you have to say, yo eliminé. Yo eliminé. Okay, now if you want to say you removed or you deleted, then you have to say, tú eliminaste. Tú eliminaste. Now if you want to say he deleted or he removed, then you have to say in Spanish, él eliminó. Él eliminó. If you want to say she removed or she deleted, then you have to say, ella eliminó. Ella eliminó. If you want to say we deleted or we removed, then you have to say, nosotros eliminamos. Nosotros eliminamos, okay? Check the root word. The word that is not changing, it's elimin, okay? Now, if you want to say you removed or you deleted, then you have to say, ustedes eliminaron. Ustedes eliminaron. And now if you want to say they deleted or they removed, then if you're talking about a group of boys, you have to say, ellos eliminaron. Ellos eliminaron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say, ellas eliminaron. Ellas eliminaron. Now we have this verb to find. Okay, find in Spanish means encontrar. 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 Okay, let's see how you have to conjugate this in Spanish. Okay, if you want to say I found, then you have to say in Spanish, yo encontré. Yo encontré. Okay, the root word, see, encontrar, ending with letter E accent, personal pronoun, yo. Okay, now if you want to say you found, then you have to say, tú encontraste. Tú encontraste. If you want to say he found, in the indefinite past you have to say, él encontró. Él encontró. If you want to say she found, you have to say, ella encontró. Ella encontró. If you want to say it found, you have to say, eso encontró. Eso encontró. Now, if you want to say we found, then you have to say, nosotros encontramos. Nosotros encontramos. If you want to say you found in the plural form, then you have to say, ustedes encontraron. Ustedes encontraron. If you want to say they found, in Spanish you have to say, if you're talking about a group of boys, ellos encontraron. Ellos encontraron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, ellas encontraron. Ellas encontraron. Okay? And now we have this verb to erase. Okay? To erase in Spanish means borrar. 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 Okay? And we have to conjugate this verb in this way in the indefinite past. I erased means yo borré. Yo borré. If you want to say you erased, then you have to say tú borraste. Tú borraste. Okay, see the root word is borr. Okay? Now, if you want to say he erased, then you have to say él borró. Él borró. If you want to say she erased, you have to say ella borró. Ella borró. If you want to say it erased, you have to say in Spanish, eso borró. Eso borró. If you want to say we erased, in Spanish you have to say nosotros borramos. Nosotros borramos. If you want to say you erased in the plural form, you have to say in Spanish, ustedes borraron. Ustedes borraron. If you want to say they erased in the plural form, plural form, sorry. If you want to say they erased, it's plural form. Obviously, if you are talking about a group of boys, then you have to say ellos borraron. Okay? Ellos borraron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas borraron. Ellas borraron. Okay? Now let's go to the next verb. We have to mix. Okay? To mix in Spanish means mezclar. Mezclar. Okay? Mezclar. And this is the way we have to conjugate this verb according to the indefinite past. If you want to say I mixed, in Spanish you have to say yo mezclé. Yo mezclé. If you want to say you mixed, you have to say tú mezclaste. Tú mezclaste. Okay, see the root word, it's mezclé. If you want to say he mixed, in Spanish you have to say él mezcló. Él mezcló. If you want to say she mixed, in Spanish you have to say ella mezcló. Ella mezcló. If you want to say it mixed, in Spanish you have to say eso mezcló. Eso mezcló. If you want to say we mixed, in Spanish you have to say nosotros mezclamos. Nosotros mezclamos. If you want to say you mixed in the plural form, in Spanish you have to say ustedes mezclaron. Ustedes mezclaron. And then if you want to say they mixed in the plural form, then you have to say ellos mezclaron. If you're talking about a group of boys, ellos mezclaron, and ellas mezclaron. Ellas mezclaron if you're talking about a group of girls. Now we have this verb to think. Okay, to think in Spanish means pensar. Pensar, okay? And this is the way we have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past. Okay, if you want to say I thought, then you have to say yo pensé. Yo pensé. Okay? Now, if you want to say you thought, in Spanish you have to say tú pensaste. Tú pensaste. Now, if you want to say he thought, in Spanish you have to say él pensó. Él pensó. Okay, see the root word in this case it's pens. Okay? Now, if you want to say she thought, in Spanish you have to say ella pensó. Ella pensó. Now, if you want to say it thought, in Spanish you have to say eso pensó. Eso pensó. Now, if you want to say we thought, in Spanish you have to say nosotros pensamos. Nosotros pensamos. If you want to say you thought in the plural form, in Spanish you have to say ustedes. Okay? Ustedes pensaron. Ustedes pensaron. And then if you want to say they thought, if you want to talk about the group of boys, then you have to say ellos pensaron. Ellos pensaron. Okay, they thought. Ellas pensaron. Ellas pensaron, if you're talking about a group of girls in English, would be exactly the same. They thought, okay? And now let's go to irregular verbs ending with AR. Why irregular verbs? Because the root can change or the ending of the verb also can change, okay? And now in this case of these irregular verbs, the ending is not going to change, okay? The root of the verb, it's the stuff that is going to change, okay? So in these irregular verbs, like if we're talking about the personal pronoun I, yo, our verb is going to end again with letter E with an accent, okay? If we're talking about the personal pronoun you, which means tú, the ending of our verb would be haste, okay? If we talk about the personal pronouns he, she, it, él, he, she, ella, it, eso, then the ending of our verb would be with letter O with an accent, okay? If we're talking about the personal pronoun we, nosotros, then the ending of our verb would be with amos, okay? And then if we're talking about the personal pronouns they and you in the plural form, okay? Ustedes, you in the plural form, and they, ellos if we're talking about a group of boys, or ellas if we're talking about a group of girls, then the ending of our verb will be with aron, okay? Let's see some verbs so you will understand this better, okay? We have this verb to analyze, okay? To analyze in Spanish means analizar. Analizar. So let's see how we have to conjugate this in the indefinite past. It's an irregular verb, okay? So remember, as I told you, check the beginning of this word, okay? The root word of this verb. We have the personal pronoun I, which means yo, and then we have the root word analiz. Check. Is it the same in every personal pronoun? No. So that's why it's an irregular verb, okay? So to say I analyzed, in Spanish you have to say yo analicé. Okay, this would be the indefinite past. Yo analicé. Yo analicé, it's with letter C. Now, if you want to say you analyzed, then you have to say in Spanish, tú analizaste with z. Okay, this is not the same. So, if you want to say you analyzed, in Spanish you have to say tú analizaste. Okay, see, it's not the same. With the personal pronoun I, yo, the root verb, it's with letter C. And then it's changing in the personal pronoun you, okay? So that's why it's an irregular verb, okay? So now if you want to say you analyzed, then in Spanish you have to say in the indefinite past, tú analizaste. Tú analizaste. Okay? Now if you want to say he analyzed, in Spanish you have to say él analizó. Él analizó. If you want to say she analyzed, then you have to say ella analizó. Ella analizó. If you want to say it analyzed, then you have to say eso analizó. Eso analizó. Now, if you want to say we analyzed, then you have to say nosotros analizamos. Nosotros analizamos. Now, if you want to say you analyzed in the plural form, then you have to say in Spanish, ustedes analizaron. Ustedes analizaron. And now if you want to say they analyzed, if you're talking about a group of boys, in Spanish you have to say ellos analizaron. Ellos analizaron. Okay, and now if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas analizaron. Ellas analizaron. Now we have this verb to search, okay, which means in Spanish, buscar, 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 okay? And let's see how we have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past and check why is it an irregular verb, okay? The root word, it's not ending and it's not the same in each personal pronoun, okay? That's why it's an irregular verb. So if you want to say, I searched, in Spanish you have to say, yo busqué. Yo busqué. I searched. Now if you want to say you searched, in Spanish you have to say, tú buscaste, okay? See, in the first personal pronoun, yo busqué, the root word, it's ending with Q-U. Okay, and the ending is letter E with an accent, okay? And then in the personal pronoun, you, tú, it's not ending with Q, you, it's ending with letter C, okay? Tú buscaste, okay? That's why it's an irregular verb. Now, if you want to say he searched, in Spanish you have to say él buscó. Él buscó. If you want to say she searched, then you have to say ella buscó. Ella buscó. If you want to say it searched, then you have to say eso buscó. Eso buscó. Now, if you want to say we searched, then you have to say nosotros buscamos. Nosotros buscamos. Okay? If you want to say you searched in the plural form, then you have to say in Spanish, ustedes buscaron. Ustedes buscaron. And now if you want to say they searched, if you want to talk about a group of boys, then you have to say ellos buscaron. Ellos buscaron. And if you want to talk about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas buscaron. Ellas buscaron. Now we have this verb to punish, okay? To punish in Spanish means castigar. Castigar. Castigar, okay? So let's see how we have to conjugate this verb. So if you want to say I punished, past tense, indefinite past, in Spanish you have to say yo castigué. Yo castigué. Okay, and see, this root word, it's ending with G and U. Okay? And then let's check the next personal pronoun. We have tú, which means you. Tú castigaste. You punished. Okay? The root word is not the same. That's why it's an irregular verb. Okay? Tú castigaste, if you want to say you punished. Okay? Now, if you want to say he punished, in Spanish you have to say él castigó. Él castigó. If you want to say she punished, then in Spanish you have to say ella castigó. Ella castigó. If you want to say it punished, then you have to say eso castigó. Eso castigó. If you want to say we punished, you have to say nosotros castigamos. Nosotros castigamos. If you want to say you punished in the plural form, you punished, then you have to say ustedes castigaron. Ustedes castigaron. Okay, in Spanish. And then if you want to say they punished, in Spanish you have to say, if you are referring to a group of boys, ellos castigaron. Ellos castigaron. And if you are referring to a group of girls, then you have to say Ellas castigaron. Ellas castigaron. Now I have this verb to swallow. Okay, if you want to say to swallow, in Spanish you have to say tragar. 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 Okay? And let's see how you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past. If you want to say I swallowed, in Spanish you have to say yo tragué. Yo tragué. Okay, and see the root word it's ending with gu. And the next we have you swallowed, which means tú tragaste. Okay, and see the root word it's ending with letter G. That's why it's an irregular verb, okay? So if you want to say you swallowed, in Spanish you have to say tú tragaste. Tú tragaste. Now if you want to say he swallowed, in Spanish you have to say él tragó. Él tragó. Now to say she swallowed, you have to say ella tragó. Ella tragó. If you want to say it swallowed, you have to say eso tragó. Eso tragó. If you want to say we swallowed, in Spanish you have to say nosotros tragamos. Nosotros tragamos. Now if you want to say you swallowed in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes tragaron. Ustedes tragaron. And then if you want to say they swallowed, in Spanish you have to say ellos tragaron. Ellos tragaron if you're talking about a group of boys, and ellas tragaron. Ellas tragaron if you are referring to a group of girls. Now I have this verb, which is to touch. Okay, it has two meanings. To touch, okay, to touch, tocar, tocar in Spanish, okay? But also it has another meaning in Spanish, which is to play, tocar, okay? To touch or to play means tocar in Spanish, okay? So now let's see how you have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past, okay? So if you want to say I played or I touched, then you have to say yo toqué. Yo toqué, okay? And see, the root word is QU, okay? It's ending with QU. And then you have the next personal pronoun, which is tú, you, tocaste, okay? There I forgot to mark aste, okay? In yellow, it would be aste. And you have toc. That's the root word, okay? So that's why it's an irregular verb. Tú, you, tocaste, okay? Toc, this is the root word. And then aste, it's the word in yellow, okay? But I forgot to highlight it. So if you want to say you touched or you played, in Spanish you have to say tú tocaste. Tú tocaste. Okay? Now if you want to say he played or he touched, then you have to say él tocó. Él tocó in Spanish, okay? If you want to say she touched or she played, in Spanish you have to say ella tocó. Ella tocó. Now if you want to say it played or it touched, in Spanish you have to say eso tocó. Eso tocó. If you want to say we played or we touched, then you have to say nosotros tocamos. Nosotros tocamos. If you want to say you touched in the plural form, you touched or you played, then in Spanish you have to say ustedes tocaron. Ustedes tocaron. And then if you want to say they touched or they played, in Spanish you have to say ellos tocaron. Ellos tocaron if you're talking about a group of boys, or ellas tocaron if you're talking about a group of girls. And now I have this other verb, okay, to organize. If you want to say organize in Spanish, you have to say organizar. Organizar, okay? And let's see how you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past. If you want to say I organized, then you have to say yo organicé. Yo organicé. Okay, see? The root word, it's different than in the personal pronoun you, tú. Okay, if you want to say you organized, then you have to say tú organizaste. Okay, you organized, tú organizaste. Okay, now if you want to say he organized, then you have to say él organizó. Él organizó. If you want to say she organized, then you have to say ella organizó. Ella organizó. If you want to say it organized, then you have to say eso organizó. Eso organizó. If you want to say we organized, then you have to say nosotros organizamos. Nosotros organizamos. If you want to say you organized in the plural form, then you have to say in Spanish, ustedes organizaron. Ustedes organizaron. And if you want to say they organized, then you have to say ellos organizaron. Okay, they organized. Ellos organizaron if you're talking about a group of boys, or ellas organizaron. Ellas organizaron if you're talking about a group of girls, okay? So now let's see regular verbs ending with er, okay? So again, we have our personal pronoun, and then the root word, okay? And then the ending of our verb, okay? So here the rules are. If you have the personal pronoun I, which means yo, in Spanish, if your regular verb it's ending with er, okay, then the ending of your verb is going to end with letter I with an accent, okay? If you have the personal pronoun I, yo, okay? Now, if you have the personal pronoun you, which means tú in Spanish, then the ending of your verb would be iste, okay? I-S-T-E. The ending of your verb with a personal pronoun tú would be iste, okay? Now, third persons, personal pronouns he, él, she, ella, it, eso. If you have this personal pronouns, then the ending of your verb will be with letter I and O with an accent, okay? Now, if you have the personal pronoun we, which means nosotros, okay, the ending of the verb would be with these letters, okay? Imos. Imos. Okay, that's the way we pronounce it in Spanish, okay? And then if you have the personal pronouns you in the plural form and they, okay, which means you in the plural form means ustedes, okay, and they, which means ellos or ellas. If you have this personal pronouns, then the ending of your verb would be with yeron, okay? Let's see some verbs ending with er, regular verbs, so you would understand this better, okay? So we have this verb, to hide. To hide in Spanish means esconder. esconder, okay? So let's see how we're going to conjugate this in the indefinite past, okay? If you want to say I hid, in Spanish you have to say yo escondí. Yo escondí. Okay, see the root word, it's escond. Regular verbs, check. In all our personal pronouns, we have the same root word, which is escond. Okay, in the white part. And now, if we have the personal pronoun I, in Spanish, yo, the ending of the verb would be with letter I with an accent, okay? Yo escondí, okay? Yo escondí. I hid, okay? Now, if you want to say you hid, then you have to say in Spanish, tú escondiste, okay? If it's regular verb and it's ending with letter ER, then you have to say escondiste. The ending would be iste because you have the personal pronoun you, which means tú in Spanish, okay? Tú escondiste, okay? Now, if you have the personal pronoun he, which means él, then the ending of the verb would be with letter I and O with an accent, okay? Escond, same root word, dio. Él escondió. He hid. Él escondió. Okay? Now, if you're talking about the personal pronoun she, and you want to say she hid, then in Spanish you have to say ella escondió. Ella escondió. Okay? See, we're having third person pronouns ending with letter I and not with an accent, okay? Now, if you want to say it hid, then you have to say eso escondió. Eso escondió. Okay, so again, it's ending with I and letter O with an accent, okay? Now, if we're talking about the personal pronoun we, and you want to say we hid, then you have to say in Spanish, nosotros escondimos. Nosotros escondimos. Now, if you want to say you hid, you have to say ustedes escondieron. Ustedes escondieron. Okay? As you can see, the verb is ending with ieron because we're talking about the personal pronoun you in the plural form. Okay? Ustedes. And now we have they hid, which means ellos escondieron. In Spanish, if you're talking about a group of boys, ellos escondieron, okay, ending with ieron, okay, check. And ellas escondieron if you're talking about a group of girls, okay, ellas escondieron. And now we have this verb to leak, okay, leak, which means lamer, lamer. In Spanish, okay? So let's see how you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past, okay? If you want to say I licked, then you have to say yo lamí. Yo lamí. If you want to say you licked, then you have to say tú lamiste. Tú lamiste, okay? See? The root word not changing, it's lam, okay? And then it changes according to the personal pronoun. Now, if you want to say he licked, then you have to say in Spanish, él lamió. Él lamió. Now, if you want to say she licked, in Spanish you have to say ella lamió. Ella lamió. Now, if you want to say it licked, in Spanish you have to say eso lamió. Eso lamió. If you want to say we licked, in Spanish you have to say nosotros lamimos. Nosotros lamimos. Okay? Now, if you have you licked in the plural form, The way you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past in Spanish is ustedes lamieron. Ustedes lamieron. And then if you want to say they licked, in Spanish you have to say ellos lamieron. If you're talking about a group of boys, ellos lamieron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, you have to say ellas lamieron. Ellas lamieron. Now I have this verb to promise. Okay, if you want to say to promise, in Spanish you have to say prometer. 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 Okay, to promise. And the conjugation of this verb in English would be I promised. Okay, if you want to say I promised, in Spanish you have to say yo prometí. Yo prometí. Okay, so check the part that is not changing because it's regular verb. It's the root word promet. Promet. Okay? If you want to say, as I was telling you, I promised, you have to say yo prometí in Spanish. Okay? Now, if you want to say you promised, then you have to say tú prometiste. Tú prometiste. Okay? If you want to say he promised, then you have to say él prometió. Él prometió. Now, if you want to say she promised, then you have to say ella prometió. Ella prometió. If you want to say it promised, then you have to say eso prometió. Eso prometió. And now let's go with we promised. If you want to say we promised, then you have to say nosotros prometimos. Nosotros prometimos. And now if you want to say you promised in the plural form, then you have to say in Spanish, ustedes prometieron. Ustedes prometieron. And now we have they promised. If you want to say this, in Spanish you have to say ellos prometieron. If you're talking about a group of boys, ellos prometieron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas prometieron. Ellas prometieron. Now I have this verb to run. Okay, if you want to say to run, in Spanish you have to say correr. 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 And let's see how you have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past, okay? If you want to say I ran, then you have to say yo corrí. Yo corrí. Okay, so see, the root word is not changing. That's why it's regular verb, okay? If you want to say you ran, then you have to say tú corriste. Tú corriste. Okay, if you want to say he ran, you have to say él corrió. Él corrió. If you want to say she ran, you have to say ella corrió. Ella corrió. If you want to say it ran, you have to say eso corrió. Eso corrió. Now, if you're talking about the personal pronoun we, you have to say we ran, which means nosotros corrimos. Nosotros corrimos. Then if you want to say you ran in the plural form, then you have to say in Spanish, ustedes corrieron. Ustedes corrieron. And now we have the personal pronoun they. They ran. If you want to say they ran, talking about a group of boys, then you have to say ellos corrieron. Ellos corrieron. Okay, group of guys, boys. And if you want to say ellas corrieron, group of girls, okay, you have to say ellas corrieron in Spanish, okay? And now we have this verb to sweep, okay? To sweep means barrer. Okay, so let's see the indefinite past of this verb and how you have to conjugate it in Spanish, okay? So if you want to say I swept, then you have to say in Spanish, yo barrí. Yo barrí. Okay? Now if you want to say you swept, you have to say tú barriste. tú barriste. Now, if you want to say he swept, you have to say él barrió. Él barrió. Okay, and see the root word is not changing. That's why it's regular verb. Now, if you want to say she swept, then you have to say ella barrió. Ella barrió. If you want to say it swept, you have to say eso barrió. Eso barrió. If you want to say we swept, you have to say nosotros barrimos. Nosotros barrimos. If you want to say you swept in the plural form, then you have to say in Spanish, ustedes barrieron. Ustedes barrieron. Now, if you want to say they swept, in Spanish you're talking about a group of boys, you have to say ellos barrieron. Ellos barrieron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas barrieron. Ellas barrieron. And now I have this verb to absorb, okay? If you want to say to absorb, in Spanish you have to say absorber. 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 And let's see how you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past. If you want to say I absorbed, then you have to say yo absorbí. Yo absorbí. Okay, look, the part that is not changing, it's absorb. Okay? Now, if you want to say you absorbed, then you have to say tú absorbiste. Tú absorbiste. Okay, now if you want to say he absorbed, you have to say él absorbió. Él absorbió. Okay, see how the third person, personal pronouns, are ending with letter I and not with an accent, okay? Now, if you want to say she absorbed, in Spanish you have to say ella absorbió. Ella absorbió. Now, if you want to say it absorbed, you have to say eso absorbió. Eso absorbió. Now, if you want to say we absorbed, in Spanish you have to say nosotros absorbimos. Nosotros absorbimos. Now, if you want to say you absorbed in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes absorbieron. Ustedes absorbieron. Okay, and now if you want to say they absorbed, if you're talking about a group of boys, then you have to say ellos absorbieron. Ellos absorbieron. Okay, and if you're talking about a group of girls, then you have to say ellas absorbieron. Ellas absorbieron. And now let's go to a regular verb ending with er. Okay, remember irregular verbs are irregular because the root is not the same, okay, or the ending is not the same, okay? So let's see these irregular verbs. We have this irregular verb to have, which means tener. Tener, okay, in Spanish. So let's see how we're going to conjugate this verb. See, we have these personal pronouns, and as you can see, the root word is the same, but the ending of the verb is not the same, okay? It's not ending as the regular verbs are ending, okay? So, if you want to say I had, in Spanish you have to say yo tuve. Yo tuve, okay, which means I had. Now, if you want to say you had, in Spanish you have to say tú tuviste, okay? You had. Tú tuviste. Now, if you want to say he had, in Spanish you have to say él tuvo. Él tuvo. Okay? If you want to say she had, in Spanish you have to say ella tuvo. Ella tuvo. If you want to say it had, in Spanish you have to say eso tuvo. Eso tuvo. If you want to say we had, okay? In Spanish, you have to say nosotros tuvimos. Nosotros tuvimos, okay? We had. Now, if you want to say you had in the plural form, in Spanish, you have to say ustedes tuvieron. Ustedes tuvieron, okay? And then if you want to say they had, okay, in Spanish, you have to say ellos, okay? This is not like, you are not able to say this like a lot, but I'm explaining. So, ellos, okay, tuvieron, okay, check the verb before, it's the same, okay, tuvieron, it's ending like in the same way. Ellos tuvieron, or if you're referring to a group of girls, then you have to say ellas tuvieron, okay, they had. Now I have this other verb, it's to want, okay, want. Want in Spanish means querer, querer, querer. Okay, so now let's see how you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past, okay? So if you want to say I wanted, then you have to say yo quise, okay? Yo quise, okay? As you can see, the root word is not the same, but also the ending of the word, it's not the same, okay? That's why it's an irregular verb. So if you want to say I wanted, then you have to say yo quise. If you want to say you wanted, then in Spanish you have to say tú quisiste. Tú quisiste. Okay? Now, if you want to say he wanted, then you have to say él quiso. Él quiso. If you want to say she wanted, you have to say ella quiso. Ella quiso. If you want to say it wanted, then you have to say eso quiso. Eso quiso. If you want to say we wanted, you have to say nosotros quisimos. Nosotros quisimos. If you want to say you wanted in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes quisieron. Ustedes quisieron. Okay, and then if you want to say they wanted, if you're talking about a group of boys, then you have to say in Spanish, ellos quisieron. Ellos quisieron. Okay, they wanted. Or ellas quisieron. Ellas quisieron if you're talking about a group of girls. Okay? So now let's see regular verbs ending with IR. Ir. Okay? If you have this regular verb ending with ir, then the ending, according to the personal pronoun you have, would be, if you have the personal pronoun I, yo, your verb, regular verb ending with IR, ir, has to end with letter I with an accent. Okay? Now, if you have regular verb ending with IR, ir, and you have the personal pronoun you, which means tú, then the ending will be iste. Okay? Now, if you have the personal pronouns he, él, she, ella, it, eso, then the ending of your regular verb will be ending with I and letter O with an accent. Okay? Now, if you have the personal pronoun we, nosotros, okay, the ending of your verb would be with the word imos. Imos, okay, IMOS. Now, if you have the personal pronouns you in the plural form, which means in Spanish ustedes, okay, and they, personal pronoun they, which means in Spanish ellos if you're talking about a group of boys, or ellas if you're talking about a group of girls. Okay, then the ending of the verb would be with this word hieron. okay? Let's see some verbs so you would understand this better, okay? So we have this verb to discuss, to argue, okay? In Spanish, to say this, we have to say discutir, discutir, discutir. Okay, and let's see how you have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past, okay? If you want to say I discussed or I argued, then you have to say yo discutí, yo discutí. And see, the root word is not changing, that's why it's regular verb, okay? It's ending with ir, I-R. The ending, if you have the personal pronoun I, yo of your verb would be with letter I with an accent, okay? Yo discutí, which means I discussed or I argued, okay? Now, if you want to say you discussed or you argued, then in Spanish you have to say tú discutiste, tú discutiste, okay? It's something with iste, okay? Because it's personal pronoun, you, tú, okay? Now, if you want to say he discussed or he argued, then you have to say in Spanish, él discutió, él discutió. Now, with the next personal pronoun, we have she. If you want to say she discussed or she argued, then you have to say ella discutió, ella discutió, okay? It's ending with letter I and O with an accent, okay? Third person, check, same ending, okay? Now, if you want to say she discussed, then you have to say ella discutió. And then if you want to say it discussed or it argued, then you have to say eso discutió, eso discutió, okay? And then if you want to say we discussed, you have to say nosotros discutimos, nosotros discutimos, okay? We discussed or we argued. Now, if you want to say you discussed or you argued in the plural form, in Spanish you have to say ustedes discutieron, ustedes discutieron. Now, if you want to say they discussed or they argued, okay? Indefinite past in Spanish, you have to say ellos discutieron. If you're talking about a group of boys, ellos discutieron. And if you're talking about a group of girls, you have to say ellas discutieron. Ellas discutieron. And now we have irregular verbs ending with IR, ir. Okay, so remember, the ending is going to change or the root word, okay? So let's check these irregular verbs ending with ir. We have to measure, okay? Measure in Spanish means medir, medir, medir. Okay, so let's see how you have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past. If you want to say, I measured, then you have to say, yo medí, yo medí. Okay, and see, check how the root word, it's changing, okay? Yo medí. And then if you have the personal pronoun you, tú, then the conjugation would be this way. If you want to say you measured, then in Spanish you have to say tú mediste, tú mediste, okay? In this case, the root word is the same, but then in the next personal pronoun, we have personal pronoun he. Then if we want to say he measured, in Spanish we have to say él midió, él midió, okay? So see, this root word, it's changing, okay? With personal pronouns yo, med, tú, med, él mid, él midió, okay? Now, if we want to say she measured, then we have to say ella midió. Ella midió. Okay, she measured. If you want to say it measured, then you have to say eso midió. Okay, so in the third person, the root is the same. Él midió, mit. Ella midió, same, mit. Eso midió, okay, same, mit. Now, if you want to say we measured, then you have to say nosotros medimos. Nosotros medimos. Okay? Now we have the root word met. Now, if you want to say you measured, then you have to say in Spanish, ustedes midieron. Okay, and then again, the root word is mid. Ustedes midieron. Okay, you measured. And now if you want to say they measured, you have to say ellos midieron. Ellos midieron if you're talking about a group of boys, or ellas midieron if you're talking about a group of girls, okay? Ellas midieron. And now we have this verb to lie, okay? To lie in Spanish means mentir, mentir, mentir. Now let's see how you have to conjugate this in the indefinite past, okay? So if you want to say I lied, in Spanish you have to say yo mentí, yo mentí, okay? Now if you want to say you lied, in Spanish you have to say tú mentiste, tú mentiste, okay, see? In this personal pronouns, the root word is the same, but then in the personal pronoun he lied, the root word is going to change, okay? And then you have to say in Spanish, él mintió, he lied, él mintió, okay? Now if you want to say she lied, you have to say ella mintió, okay? And I forgot to put eso mintió, okay? Eso mintió, okay? Same root word, mint. Now, if you want to say we lied, then you have to say nosotros mentimos. Nosotros mentimos. Now, if you want to say you lied in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes mintieron. You lied. Ustedes mintieron. Okay? And then if you want to say they lied, you have to say ellos mintieron. If you're talking about a group of boys, ellos mintieron, they lied. And ellas mintieron if you're talking about a group of girls, okay? They lied. Ellas mintieron. And now we have this verb to melt, okay? Which means in Spanish, derretir, derretir. And let's see how you have to conjugate this verb in the indefinite past, okay? If you want to say I melted, then you have to say yo derretí, okay? Now, if you have the personal pronoun you, tú, then you have to say you melted, okay? Which means in Spanish, tú derretiste, okay? Now, if you want to say he melted, you have to say él derritió. If you want to say she melted, you have to say ella derritió. If you want to say it melted, you have to say eso derritió. If you want to say we melted, you have to say nosotros derretimos. Now, if you want to say you melted in the plural form, then you have to say ustedes derritieron. Okay? And now if you want to say they melted, you have to say ellos derritieron. Ellos derritieron, okay? If you're talking about a group of men, and if you're talking about a group of women, then you have to say ellas derritieron. Ellas derritieron. So that would be all for today's lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.